Okay, well, it's 5 minutes after, so why don't we just jump in?
Mm-hmm.
I want to welcome everyone today. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that we've got different time zones to juggle. I know Anna, particularly, you're across the pond there, and also sometimes we got people from Australia, New Zealand. But I'm so glad that this technology enables us to sort of share the same virtual space, if not, since we can't share the same physical space. Um, but Anna this is her second presentation with us, and she's got a very interesting topic. I know that she's been thinking about for a long time, and she wants to invite us into that thought process and discussion. So Anna, if you'd like to take it away and run it how you like.
Yeah, hi everyone. I think you know a bit about me from the description of the event. I do not want to tell you too much because one of the roles I would like to have for these sessions, at least at the beginning, is for us to focus more on our being than our doing. So less about who we are and what we do and what things mean to us and how we experience them and how we relate to them. So yeah, before I start, I just wanted to invite you to ask yourself that question. What does communication mean to you? And some of you have already answered here in the chat. So we have understanding, clarity. Communication is a tool that gives me access to community and care. Sharing, independence and access. Being able to relay wants and needs, effectively conveying a thought or feeling. So being successful in communicating across the thing that we wanted to communicate across. Now, I suppose the question is, how do we assess that, right? So often communication is something that we desire, but something that's extremely difficult for us to measure, right? Something that we are putting across, but something that we are not really sure in which shape and form is going to get back to us. Connection with people, collaboration, expressing your emotions and interests. Yeah, okay. So this one is more concerned with identity. All right, yeah, this is good. I'm going to stop sharing and talk now. I'm going to be helping myself with a bit of text here. So thinking about how I want to deliver the session to you today, a session that's entirely experimental and I hope focused on exploring the unknown, the undocumented, the uncategorized. I've been asking myself some unanswerable, at least to me and for now, questions. What does it mean to communicate? How do we determine when communication takes place and when it doesn't? A communication alternative to what? And why do we even call it alternative? And I've asked myself so many of these questions that at one point I began feeling utterly hopeless. But the question that lingered with me the most was, how do we find each other's perspectives across different languages and cultures? And since English is not my native tongue and American is not my native culture, I think this one we may be able to explore together today. And I will be honest with you also. I want to stress that this is the least structured thing I think I have ever done. And the purpose of this session is to go beyond the notion of normative communication in ways in which we as humanity have perhaps never gone before. And this is a big word and a big aim, but I mean, let's set that. Let's see where it takes us. Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe we're going to need that to prep ourselves for the arrival of the alien civilization. Who knows? I'm kidding. a part of me would like to have it all structured and organized, but I am also urging myself to remain lost, because I think it's an important state to embrace, especially when we are exploring something that we don't really how to begin with, playing with. So I would like to invite you to get lost with me. And here's where we can share a bit of a linguistic giggle. So here's what I think is important here. I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself, like I said before, through your being rather than your doing. I've noticed that people often during these sessions, people maybe without academic backgrounds sometimes feel hesitant to speak up. So for now, I would like us to set our academic histories aside, just for now. I mean, we don't have to do away with academia altogether, but just for this first session, let's try to be a little bit more open to who we are outside of what we're doing. So I invite you to be open and intimate with me, maybe even to trust me before you get to decide whether I am qualified to talk about alternative communication. So let's get a little bit radical, guided maybe by instinct more than information. What I want to ask you is the following, and I think this is going to be the main focus of our session today. What is your personal experience with communication? How do you feel when you think about it? And perhaps most importantly, what's the most unconventional or outlandish way that you've ever communicated? And I'm going to start just to break the ice. So my name is Anna. And from a very young age, I remember receiving a lot of input, both verbal and nonverbal. Many messages were directed towards me, but they didn't necessarily expect a reply from me. So from my perspective, communication was always only flowing in one direction. And for a long time, I associated communication with expectations, because most of my interactions involved listening and understanding what others wanted from me. Communication didn't seem curious to me, which I think is fundamental, really. It is supposed to be curious. It wasn't about exploration. It always had a goal or an agenda. That's how I perceived it. And I only began to play with communication when I started interacting with animals, who I believe are naturally much more curious than humans, at least in the sort of system that we are living in currently, as humans. Some of my most authentic moments of communication happened when I was entirely focused on gathering information and nothing else. For example, when my partner had a fever seizure and there was no way to communicate with him, or when I was in pain and I had to talk my body through that pain, or when I suddenly felt open enough to remember things from the past, for example, with a completely different perspective and perhaps more honesty. So interestingly, most of these moments happened in uncomfortable or out of ordinary situations, and they had more to do with the way that I related to myself than the information that I received from the outer environment per se. And in answer to the last part of that question coming from me, if I could choose how to communicate with the world, it would be through humming. I really like to hum. I don't know, it's really inexplicable. It's just something that comes really naturally to me. I think even more natural than talking. I would gladly do away with languages. I think transferring thoughts and feelings without words would be more genuine. It would resonate with more than just our sense of hearing. And the oddest way I sometimes communicate, and this is going to make me sound really crazy, is by meowing at my cat. I have a cat that's incredibly clingy, and she sometimes only understands that she's being too much if I match her pitch with a meow of my own. So this is the most outlandish way of communication I think I have ever partook in. And yeah, and now I would like to invite you to answer that question. I'm going to share screen again so that you can have a look. I think it's easier to answer when you can look at the question rather than you just heard it once. And again, if someone wants to raise their hand or just write in the chat, both are fine. I'm going to open the chat here and just see what we have. Yes, go on.
Hi, my name is, and initially when you said we were going to introduce ourselves without our academia, I started listing like, I am loud, I am passionate about life, I am an advocate for children. But to focus on your personal experience with communication, and I really like this question as a former speech therapist. I am a verbal communicator. I mean, I think I came out of the womb communicating verbally. I've always been loud. I love to talk, and I have a lot to say. So my personal experience with communication is that. But interestingly enough, I went into the field to work with kiddos that struggled with communication. So answering this question has made me think about the fact that communication has always been something of value to me, and I guess I decided I wanted to help others have the opportunity to do that. And so interesting, I just kind of thought about that. How do I feel when I think about communication, and what's my most unconventional? So I have a best friend that I've known for 30 years. We have this communication thing that we do with intonations. And so we may be in a conversation and I'll say, and like we know exactly what we're saying. The funny thing is we do it when we're on the phone because we don't live in the same place. And then I start hearing like my coworkers picking it up. My foster kids started doing it. And so it was really kind of funny that other people were picking up on this whatever organic communication that developed between my best friend and I, and we still do that. The last part is in terms of how do I feel when I think about communication? And I did answer in terms of communication for me is connection. I absolutely love people. I'm a people person. I think I value people more than anything. And I was at a dinner party with friends, not really a dinner party. We were on the deck eating snacks and drinking wine, but it sounds nice to say I was at a dinner party. So we were talking about waiting. And I said I didn't understand why it was so hard for adults to wait in line. You know, when you go to the grocery store, you're not the only person. You know you're going to have to wait. You're not the only person. And everyone in the room said, oh, I hate waiting in line. And I said, I love waiting in line. And we were laughing. And then I thought about it and I said, oh, it just hit me why I like waiting in line. It gives me an opportunity to talk to strangers. And I love talking to strangers. Like, I sometimes approach strangers in a store and then apologize for giving them a story. And sometimes I get really good friendships out of it. So that is my response, and I will mute myself because I am a talker.
Yeah, thank you for that. So communication is essentially the way that you relate, with and to the world and people. So the most organic thing, right? And I love how you were talking about these sounds that you make. And I just think that it's incredible how often with that form of communication, we don't have to provide much of a guideline or a dictionary, right? We don't have to go for that whole process of, oh, this word is, do we both have the same, do we both understand it in the same way? Do we both have the same, do we both think it carries the same meaning? And then when the culture enters into that, Or for example, when we're talking to someone whose first language is not the same as ours, that becomes really, really challenging, right? Maybe not challenging. Let's exchange challenging for interesting. But yeah, thank you.
I'm
Anyone else?
actually in
Yeah.
Mexico learning Spanish, and I was frustrated the first 6 months, and then it finally hit me. It's because I talk so much and I only know a little Spanish. So I was really frustrated that I couldn't connect with people, but now I'm better. So thank you for listening and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's actually how I learned Portuguese. You know, when I first arrived here, I could only say bom dia. That was all I could say. And I lived with a Portuguese family and I couldn't say anything. And I'm not maybe a very talkative person, but when I have something to say that I think could contribute, I get really frustrated when I cannot. So I think, you know, that feeling of like, you know, a really strong want or desire is actually what pushed what furthered my learning. Yeah, but enough about me. We're gonna hear from now. Where is it? I think I've lost.
I was typing in the message. The messages in the chat.
Okay, I use AAC, the American Sign Language. Prefer over verbal communication because it's more accessible. I work at specialized school for children with complex communication needs. It is a good, accessible environment for me to work. I like seeing how many different ways all students and staff communicate, but overall goal is always being understood and understanding. Yeah. And yeah, very fundamentally speaking, it is that, isn't it? And in fact, I was wondering when I was preparing this session, how we could make that more accessible, because we're talking about alternative communication, but this session isn't all that accessible, is it? For example, for someone who uses sign language, I am unable to communicate in that way. So maybe that's something that we could ponder on later on, how to make sure that it's something that a lot of people that communicate in different ways could not only take part in, but also share and like actively contribute. I'm gonna read some more of these answers. I don't think anyone has a hand raised. No. Sorry? No. Most unconventional, outlandish way of communicating. My first thought is unknowingly masking, trying to act neurotypical for 13 years in corporate America. It is extremely common, not all unconventional, but to me seems completely alien, outlandish, using hints instead of just saying what they mean, the deception in politics, being the only one saying the truth, being open and direct. It is an extremely strange world. The ones who know themselves the least are the ones who feign being most in control. Control is an illusion. Nothing is what it seems. Diagnosis has changed everything. I actually did have a really intense conversation about the not the corporate America, but the corporate Europe today with a very close friend of mine. And I think it's a separate topic. The way that we communicate in how can we even call that in these intense environments where a lot is expected of us, sometimes more so even psychologically, I feel, than in terms of factual work and competence, because so much of that is concerned with being a certain way rather than simply knowing how to do certain things. And it can be a terrible, terrible place to be. I haven't really worked in, I mean, I worked for a huge airline. I mean, it is a corporation, but it's not exactly an office job. But I definitely can relate to that. And I think we mask naturally every day anyways as neurodivergents. But then in environments like that, it just becomes exhausting. And I think it's when, for many of us, the psychosomatic symptoms start to show up. It's one of the triggers, I think. Okay. My personal experience with communication is that I care about it deeply. I think about how best to communicate and try to do so, but it can be a frustrating experience because it often goes awry. I also have a nonverbal son, and it is unlike any other kind of communication. Thank you for sharing this. It makes me frustrated in a different way, wanting for him to be able to tell me when he is sick or frustrated, or even just what his favorite color is. My son and I have special unconventional way of communicating. I know what his different smiles and vocalizations mean, and I can hear his vocalizations differently than anyone else. We are so close that I know this is why I listen to his specific language when most talk over or try to pull out words they can understand. Yeah. This is what I had in mind with alternative communication. Thank you for sharing this. Yeah. Okay, this is nice, but I have more questions for you. This is the second question I have for you. I would really love for us to engage a bit more though in verbal communication. If anyone would like to speak up. Like, I think I'm the only one non-native speaker here. So please help me out. What assumptions do we make about someone's ability to communicate when they don't use conventional methods like speech, gestures, or technology? I don't know. I would really like to hear what thinks of that, either in the chat or any other way, but I think you're perhaps the right person to ask this question.
Yeah, I do. I don't want to take up. I do like to talk too, but but the assumptions that are often made that I witness with my son would be that clear answers are there, that there's a sense that by the way that he looks older than he is, but he also, you can't tell somebody is nonverbal by looking at them. So a lot of the times this shows up with on the playground. He goes to an autistic support school, so there it's a little bit more normalized to have different ways of communicating. He can't communicate through the AAC device yet. And so just one quick interesting way of communicating that children have shown me with my son. There was an instance where he was on the playground and there were two siblings there, a boy and a girl, and they run up to him asking to play with them, typical children, behavior. He can't respond. So his grandmother told the little girl, he doesn't speak. And then the little girl goes, "Well, did Ursula steal his voice, like the Little Mermaid?" And then they ended up playing and trying to include him and running around and asking him to chase him. Of course, he has different functions than them, but it was fun to see the way that a child's mind tries to put it into something they can understand. And so I just thought it was, oh yeah, Ursula stole his voice, but you can still play with me.
Have you, would you say that the way that you communicate with your son has in some way changed and influenced the way that you communicate with people? I mean, with humans in general. Has it changed it in any way? Have it made you, I don't know, maybe more, you know,
I tried to be a little bit more understanding of alternative communications. I also recently started a job which, we largely work with autistic students and research, and just a whole different world of understanding and um, trying to make everything as accessible as possible. And I feel like it's overwhelming at some points. Like there's so many ways that we need to think about communication and who. And making it accessible to everyone, and that does require a lot of thought. And I you might, I don't know if you feel the same way, but because I do like to talk, a lot of times I don't put a lot of thought into what I'm about to say. And so I think it's something that I've tried a little bit harder, particularly in written communication, and trying to pay attention to the accessibility suggestions, and so that, and I'm still learning so much.
I think it is interesting. People that have this stream of consciousness, they actually do sometimes answer them, they sometimes come up with these extremely profound insights out of nowhere. I don't know if you've experienced that, because I feel like when you don't put much thought maybe into what you're saying, it really comes from deep within, right?
Yeah, I do think that it's true. I think that at least in my, like, I think while I talk, and it's how I organize the way that I think. And so, but at the same time, there is something to be gained from thinking it through, and I try to be as concise and short with my written language as possible, which is the opposite of what I end up doing when I talk. And so I think it's just maybe it's more code switching as well, but also just the accessibility, like being aware that there's multiple types of people that are going to be reading or listening to something. I'm much more aware of that than I ever was before.
Yeah. Thank you.
I will sort of tag on to what you said in terms of the making adjustments. And one of the things that I do in the work that I do, if you call it work, but I work with families and kiddos in the autism community, and a lot of parents are autistic themselves, but my students in my school are as well. And I make adjustments for each person. So I have to, I actually do have the ability to be quiet and listen. I have to work really, really hard, but I do. And I make adjustments, and so explaining this to therapists and teachers when they're talking to their students or talking to the parents, I remind them you're communicating, but you're communicating in a way that you communicate, and even though you're both verbal communicators, you're not seeing that they're not receiving the information. So making those adjustments. But what you were talking about, Anna, in terms of not having to have rules and all of those things, I wanted to just share in relation to the conventional or non-conventional. I had the wonderful pleasure of going to Guatemala to do some volunteer at a children's center. And specifically, I was supposed to be going to work with a couple of kiddos in this very rural, no electricity, no running water, mountainous, beautiful area for kiddos with autism. And I went there, and to my surprise, there were 2 non-speaking autistic children there. There were 5 children, for whatever reason, say absolutely nothing. I think because they had big sisters that spoke for them, but doesn't matter. And then there was one girl that was profoundly hearing impaired. What I found fascinating was these children had the ability to play without adult intervention. The children just played, right? Like played in the center, played on the swings. Not one child that communicated differently than verbal was left out. Every single child without adult intervention, accommodated, adjusted, included, every kiddo, whether they could speak or not speak, hear or not hear. And the little girl who was hearing impaired was stuck in first grade for 3 years. And I played a game with her, a card game that she's really good at because, of course, she's relied on her visual. This little girl sat there and she plays this game and she wins. And the concept is you have to count your cards, right? And to see who wins. It was very clear that she won, besides the fact that I did not know how to play the game, I still would not have won. So when I looked at her and another girl pointed to her, that was a communication of how many do you have? And she did this. That is how she communicated how many cards she had. And at that moment, I said, we need to get her out of first grade. We need to figure out what we can do. But more than anything, she has something to say, and we have got to find a way for her to say it. And it was bringing it back to what we're talking about. These children all adjusted and developed a way to communicate without having to use words, without rules around sign language. She had 2 siblings and her mother, and they had a way of communicating, and it was amazing. And as a speech therapist, it was amazing to see just the inclusion without adult intervention. Like, you know, I feel like in the United States, I feel like, oh my gosh, I think we actually are responsible for like our adult biases have prevented kids from naturally just including everyone. And not that I probably didn't think about it, but it really just kind of just slammed me in the face. So I just wanted to share that because I think what you said, Anna, in terms of, you know, whether it's the example of me, my best friend, making up this thing organically, communication will happen. I think that in the typical normative, you know, people kind of environment, everyone's looking for this one thing, and when they don't get that one thing, they just feel like there's nothing to be said. They don't have anything to say, and that's what they feel, and they do. Everybody has something to say, just in a different way. And I'm going to purposefully mute now.
Yeah. And I can't think of any other way for us to challenge that than by introducing these different voices, right? I would really like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so my name is, I am a late diagnosed autistic. Actually, this year is when I got the diagnosis, although we've been kind of toying with the idea since 2021. But anyways, to answer the question about assumptions, I think that normative society places on those who don't use conventional communication. I think they often see those individuals then as unintelligent or broken, and it does feel like then normative society feels like it's not worth the effort to attempt to then communicate with them because it's too difficult, or they won't understand anyway, so why waste your time? And so that's really frustrating, because I think sometimes, and I can only speak from my personal experience, as an autistic, communication can be difficult, and trying to find the right words to convey what you're feeling takes time, at least for me, to kind of process what I want to say, what I'm feeling. Half the time I don't know what I'm feeling. That's something I've discovered along this journey, is part of the reason why I've had such difficulties, because I don't know what I'm feeling or why I'm feeling it. But I think communication is important, and so throughout my life, I have developed a love for words. And I think the reason why that's developed is because I'm trying to find words that convey what I want to say effectively because I feel like most of the time I am misunderstood. And so it's frustrating, I think, but I think that's also why I love music. Is because music moves you emotionally. I like theater, like musicals, and I feel like they convey what sometimes you can't figure out how to say. So if I could choose to communicate in a way, I'd probably choose through music. But so I think I'll be quiet now. But
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I did actually want to ask you if there is some other form that you naturally navigate towards, and you did mention music. So yeah, I was wondering about that, because for so many of us who have had stigmatizing experiences with communication, or who have felt at some point in life put down by someone, or being told off, or not being able to verbalize what we feel. I relate to that. For a really long time, I had troubles, and I still do, verbalizing exactly what I felt, because I didn't really know what I felt. I think it's sort of natural for people who have experienced that to seek other forms. And this is what I wanted this session to be about. I mean, just essentially an exploration of the other forms that we all navigated towards as a result of perhaps being a little bit disappointed with the normative communication, with the very strict rules of normative communication, not even so much so verbally as very often non-verbally, right? Because words are one part of it, but then the other part is the fact that maybe we don't move in a way that people are comfortable with, and people are comfortable with a very small range of movements, right? Or gesture in a way that maybe makes them a little bit too uncomfortable, or either too close or too far. So music, okay, for me it's humming, somehow related to music, just I suppose different sounds than words. For me, the thing with words is that is also that they are very specific, and we cannot rearrange them. And I think language is much more fluid, and I'd like to be able to sometimes, change the order of letters, because I don't always feel that what I want to say is exactly expressed by that particular word. And maybe this is where music and sounds in general, it just become more natural, because we have the agency to regulate them more so than the speech.
yeah, when I was younger, I used a lot of gibberish. like it's not words; they had no meaning.
Yeah.
But it was just verbalization that's made me, I don't know, it made me feel good. And as I've gotten older, I moved away from the gibberish, but I still make a lot of like noises. My wife would say I just make random weird noises. So
Yeah, so there we go. By half of this session, we've discovered that most of us actually chirp and tweet and meow, right? I mean, that's really something. Okay, I see that as her hand raised. Would you like to write in the chat? I'm just gonna have a look. Yeah. Someone wrote, I like to rearrange words in unconventional ways and try to add new meaning. Yeah. I love poetry for that reason. Yeah, that's something that I have also found helpful. Poetry, writing in general, but especially poetry. It does help you do that. Okay, and wrote, people assume anything other than perfect voice communication means incompetent. Assume can speak for self. They look to someone you are with to communicate with, instead just ignore you, even adults. Some people refuse to interact and say they can't. Even though disabled people are trying, writing, use TTS, AALS, AAC, they assume they can't. Yeah. People also assume speaking slower or louder will help them be understood. I don't know why. Yeah. Sometimes they'll repeat that same question 3 times, right? Please go ahead.
Hi there. I've always been very creative about communication. To me, it's an art. It's a game. It's fun. It's. I always want to I usually observe people really closely, and I love to make noises, and I love to pat or touch whatever is appropriate for them culturally. And like for instance, I one time was assigned to go into a garden filled with people from all over the world, and I was supposed to go in there and learn what plants they were growing, what they used them for, describe the use. But everybody spoke different languages. And so I went in there and I was smiling and happy and really, wanted to convey that I was joyed to share this experience with them. And so I went in there and I would point to my mouth and then different parts of the plant, and they would go, no, no, no. And then they would show me the uses and write down the name of the plant in their languages. So I think I worked with 60 people one day and came out of there with a really complete report with the different plants and took pictures of them to look up afterwards. So I love communicating and communication. What other people consider communication challenges, I actually consider um, fun and a wonderful way to share and build bridges. But when I was a kid, I used to work a lot with. I lived in a very busy street, and animals would get hit often, and I would just take them out of the road and put them in the dark for a little while and hum to them and make heartbeat kinds of sounds and comfort them so that they would calm down. Then I'd try to assess how they were doing, and if I could tell that they weren't going to do well, then I would touch them. I also believe in touch and pressure, and so it was a very, very learned how to comfort and with sound and touch and so forth. And I knew I always study everything. So I kind of understood their languages already and their body movements. So I always kind of knew what was appropriate with most species. And I've worked with animals a lot in my life. So I can go into the worst circumstances and make that animal feel very, very comforted no matter how much pain it is, because as a human, I've had a few accidents myself. And I know how to do that kind of stuff. But I think that I'm an extraordinary communicator. Um, but I think a degree of that is spiritual. Ever since I was born, I kind of felt a connection to people, and was very empathetic and could almost guess exactly how people were feeling just by being near them. So anyway, I really value just the tone of voice, and I've actually worked with a lot of people that were dying, and um, can usually make someone ready to leave this world very confident and chilled and happy about it, and how to let go with I don't know how to describe it, but it's just a certain um something that you share with someone, but on a deep, deep level, because if you're working with someone, you're the last person that they're having communication with, deep, deep communication, and you're the one who's instilling a good experience. and sharing how to help them not feel so much pain by breathing and different techniques. So anyway, I enjoy working with people and animals. Thank you.
Thank you.
I loved this answer so much. I think it's not a bit spiritual. I think it's very much so. I mean, I suppose we can call it spiritual. Those of us who are a little bit hesitant using this word, perhaps we can call it fluency and just other ways of perceiving the energy around us. And I mean, we are, right, energy, and the things we say are more often than not just a weight in space that is meant to communicate something that the words sometimes just don't match. And there are people who are very skilled in not paying attention to the words, but to something else. If there are words involved, right? We're talking about animals. I think that's a whole different thing. And I loved how you said that you always search for, what's the word that you used? An appropriate way to approach an animal. I think that's wonderful. I always, even if it's just like a bird that flies and sits on my window, I always ask myself, how should I introduce myself? What's appropriate? What's the cultural paradigm that I should adhere to? Yeah, there is nothing a lot of the things you said resonate, and I'm not going to expand more on that. I really love that answer. There's one more question I have for you, and since we have 10 minutes left, I think we can move to that one. I think somewhat we've touched on that, but perhaps there's something else that someone would like to share. What are the behaviors or expressions you've seen in people with autism that challenge conventional ideas of communication? So we talked about how difficult it is sometimes for not just neurodivergent people, but I think anyone who doesn't adhere to the very normative form and style of communication to be understood. Again, when I say that, I struggle even with what would that mean, because how can we know that we are understood? I suppose with a simple communication, as in, can you pass me that? Or like you said, is that edible? It's easy to measure that. But when we're communicating concepts or emotions, that becomes more challenging. Yeah. Yeah. Let's hear from you.
Just one major aspect of this with my son that I've seen is stimming. He actually has a really beautiful stim that he stims with ribbons and scarf. But there's also some vocalizations with it, and I think that people have perceived that as being disruptive or rude. And as he gets older, and less cute and childlike, I do get concerned about those perceptions with him out in the world. And so I do know that most people are understanding that but there are occasional like side eyes or just looks that we get when he's being loud in a situation where being loud isn't the norm. And so, we do think about that when I try not to limit what we do based on these types of things, but there is a limitation to our energies as well, and being able to explain how a stim is a communication and not a bad behavior, how a stim is, allowing him to express himself, just like we, any of us would, or how it's a natural act of, and he is a sensory needy kid, and so even just vocalizations, the waving movements, that all allows him to organize. I kind of explain it like it allows him to organize his brain in a better way, to be able to do the things that he wants to do. And most people are pretty understanding of it, but there's always going to be folks who are feel like it's disruptive.
Thank you. Hear from you.
I will quickly say that to this question, I still cannot believe it's 2024 and people are still writing goals for eye contact. I mean, the fact that people think you have to look at someone to communicate with them in 2024 astounds me. It is 2024, and whenever I go into a meeting, I say, so interesting because my blind friend communicates just fine without looking at me. So, and there are other countries where, looking at someone while you're talking is not part of their social norm. So for me, in terms of what I see, that challenges, it's still the eye contact is still an issue that people are focusing on. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like seriously, it's 2024. I'm just saying it's 2024. Like, can we move on to something else, please?
It's
So
almost
that's
2025.
Yeah, I know.
2024 is almost over. Yeah, but there's so many things we still haven't gotten over, in 21st century. So yeah, I mean, communication is definitely one of the starting points of us unpacking that. But then again, it will, I think, take a lot of those of us who do not deliver the message in the normative way to bang on the doors and the windows in ways that are at first incomprehensible and challenging. And I don't know, just force that that shift in how we relate to one another, because so much of that is also concerned with expectations, right? But okay, let's hear from, I'm sorry, this screen sometimes still confuses me.
Hi, this is a little different maybe than some of the things that I've said in the past, but something that I notice that happens a lot in my conversations with other autistic people are it like the acceptable uses of tangents, whether it is to we're having a conversation about a topic and it's related to either my special interest or there's something that I think that a story or something that I think is related that will provide context to this conversation is something that happens a lot in autistic dialogue that I find very rewarding and very fruitful. But when you have that type of tangent with an holistic person, there is that social rule of you're only really supposed to talk so long back and forth that then you start losing that person. And I don't know if that counts as a unique behavior or expression, but that's a difference in autistic communication that I truly feel is not a negative difference.
I just have to say, I love that you brought that up, because that is another thing that I tell educators when they say, oh, they need to talk about, I'm like, listen, if they want to talk about climate control, then talk about climate control. Like, seriously, what harm is it for you to have an interest in something that someone else is interested in, especially if you're a teacher or all those things. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that is a behavior that a lot of goals are around as well, in terms of they need to talk about a different topic. And, I'm sure that you guys have figured out by now I'm very verbal, and I will really, really quick say, I always say everybody talks about what they're interested in. I don't talk about football because I'm not interested in it, so I don't go to events with people who like football. Everybody has a right to choose. I'm muting myself.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add, I also think honesty is something that autistic people really do not struggle with, and we need more of that. Would also like to say something, so please take it away. Oh, are you there?
Sorry, is that me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, they must have signed me out and I didn't realize. My name is, nice to be here, thanks for having me. So, looking at the prompt on the screen, what are the behaviors or expressions you've seen in people with autism that challenge conventional ideas of thinking? So I'm here with, I just picked my kids up from school. My 6-year-old is on the autism spectrum. He's I guess technically like level 1. I have mild autism myself and ADHD and whatever. When I was a kid, I remember that, like, or my parents tell me that, like, when I would meet new kids on the playground, I would just walk up to them and start singing the theme song of, like, my favorite cartoons, right? So at the time it was like Ghostbusters, and then later it was like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever, and like, it's one of those things like where, nobody ever saw the signs, but it's like they were there, where it's like they just sort of like laugh and they're like, well, that's cute, like some of the other people are saying, like, but as you get older, it kind of, the cuteness wears off and it's less acceptable, right? But anyways, I was reminded of all this because, my 6-year-old in particular, he likes to invent, like new ways of communicating like all the time. We joke about him having, like invented like 10 different languages. Of course, he's just like, playing, he's coming up with stuff on the fly and whatnot. But most recently, we got some guinea pigs at home, right? We talked a lot about like affinity with animals and this kind of thing. And he has a very, he has an affinity towards them. He's very good at like, copying like their weaking and like the noises that they make for like the different, emotions that they're expressing. Mostly it's give me food, right? So he's very good at that one. But also like when his mom goes to hug him at night and this kind of thing, that's how he expresses his love sometimes. He starts thinking like a guinea pig, So anyway, that's it.
Yeah, so mimicry.
Very creative.
Yeah,
Yes,
mimicry is a powerful one, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we are 2 minutes past the time. Thank you so much to all of you who have contributed and not contributed. In fact, there is something that I do want to share with you. I have this form that I would like you to open and fill in. I mean, if you feel like it, if not, then I replied to. I think I can leave it like that in the chat, right? So basically, just I'm gonna stop sharing. It's completely anonymous, and I would just like to ask you to share perhaps something that you didn't have a chance to mention during the session, or something that you thought was, I don't know, something that maybe we could perhaps touch on during the next session. Just anything that comes to mind, really. Your expectations, or what you'd be interested in exploring, because this session for me was sort of like gathering information, seeing where we are most likely to go. So please provide me with more data if you'd like. Yeah.
Anna, I should also add that, in addition to Zoom, we're on Facebook, and we also have the Meetup has a chat, and we also have a Discord server. So we're trying to have multiple different channels for people to communicate and connect. That link, so is that a Google form that you?
Yeah, it's a Google form, yeah.
Okay, so what I can do is I can copy that link and paste it into the different forums, and people who have attended, even people probably who haven't, could probably submit some kind of information on their thoughts and ideas.
That would be very kind of you, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so based on that, I'll see where the second session will take us. I have some ideas. I think we could perhaps maybe look into how communication takes place in different kingdoms, animal, plant, how cosmic communication happens. We definitely have a lot of things that we know already about communication, and as we are delving into that, perhaps we could slowly uncover what we don't know. So thank you so much for hearing me out today. And yeah, I wish you all the rest of the wonderful day. For me, I'm gonna go to sleep now. Yeah, and I'll see you in October.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.